three key things: autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Three key drivers that if people have those, they're going to ultimately have motivation.
People are different and different things motivate everybody. That's why when you're in a leadership position, you really have to understand how to motivate at an individual level. It's not a one size fits all model, which takes time. And I think that's where leadership is won and lost.
When you look at those three things, autonomy, mastery, purpose, they don't say paycheck in there, because sometimes we think we're motivated by a paycheck, but ultimately that's actually not what motivates us.
Welcome to the 5th episode of This is the Way with Artin and Michael. We wanted to launch this podcast to share experience and insight with you to hopefully help pave the way for others who are in the same shoes as we were 10, 15 years ago. If you're already calling us your Jedi, I'm great. In this episode, we want to talk about the dreadful topic of motivation as it relates to job place motivation. You know, when Michael and I were discussing what next topic should be, we quickly align on this.
Yeah, it's easy to when it's one of those things that we've, I don't want to say been there, done that, but in essence, we definitely had a lot of experiences where we were trying to talk each other back into motivation, use some of our tools and techniques that we would do, and just find ourselves crawling out of that pit, because it's no fun being there, and it feels like dark point when I think back at actually the multiple times that it's happened in our careers.
Yeah, well, we've had a career that spans 2 decades now. We've definitely have our shares of ups and downs. So, what will be kind of one of your earlier examples? Do you remember?
A couple of things actually popped to my mind. One more recent, and one, like a better, but yeah, earlier in my career. And I think the earlier one I'll touch on first. And in that scenario, I had just been in the role for a period of time. And this was, I'll say, before I actually sort of started fast tracking my career. And that lack of progress and movement for me, and feeling like I didn't really have a clear understanding for my own path and future, was one where it was then hard to continue to stay motivated, because I was really coming in and trying to outperform versus the role. Sometimes that even coming in, in the middle of the night, for lack of a better way to put it, because this was before everybody was taking their, laptops home. I hate saying stuff like that. That sounds.
Well, it was desktops. It was giant desktops when we first
That's
started.
exactly. You were doing it, yeah, and there was just more jobs that therefore expected as much. In fact, only then were we didn't have, I think, Blackberries, were that thing. So you normally didn't. But for me, when I wanted to reach somebody and talk to them who were overseas, that was the way that I would have to operate and work, so that you could save a day between communication when we were doing translations and such. So anyway, but for me then, I was doing stuff like that. It really felt above and beyond, but it wasn't yielding the results that I wanted. So I think that was one. And just to touch on a recent one, I had also got to a point of recent, and this is, part of me now in my new direction and future, but I was in a role where there was a really lack of clear vision, and there wasn't that thing for me to grab onto and get excited about within that future. Sure, I was trying to create that within my own team, but ultimately, because the leader had lacked this vision, that ended up impacting some of the things that I personally felt I was able to contribute to at work, because I'm motivated heavily by being able to have mastery around something, or even be able to just really drive something forward to be able to help the company or others achieve their goals. And when that is something that I don't see progress towards, that lack of progress can feed me with a bit of, or seed me with some unhappiness. So those were two of the things that come to mind. But there were multiple times, often coming around to every point where I started to get a little bit more bored with the role, because I had hit like a growth plateau. How about you?
Yeah, definitely progress and growth, I feel like is definitely universal. Because when you feel progress, I think it triggers happiness. And happiness kind of just motivates you, because you're just happy and you're excited about what you're doing. I also think, and people are different and different things motivate everybody. That's why when you're in a leadership position, you really have to understand how to motivate at an individual level. It's not a one size fits all model, which takes time. And I think that's where leadership is won and lost, where leaders that actually take the time to understand what motivates people at the individual level win.
Yeah.
People that are leaders that are in leadership roles that are lazy about the process, they just think that one blanket rule or something they do as for the entire team works, and that's not how things work. We're human, we're individuals. But I would say, what motivated me as well was the idea that I was responsible for the growth, the creation of that thing. And I was given responsibility and autonomy and allowed to do it my way. And so I guess you can kind of say, not being micromanaged and only, as leaders above me, worrying about the outcome and not how to get there. Like when I was allowed to figure out how to get there and only judged by the results, I was motivated. I also would get motivated when I was included in kind of higher level discussions or decisions, because I felt, inclusivity. I'm like, okay, if my opinion is being valued, and that motivated me. When that got cut off, not, malicious or anything, it's just big corporate world, things happen. When that kind of started being reduced and you don't feel like your opinion starts to be valued anymore, that's when my motivation goes down. And then I start to look around of, okay, how do I get that feeling back? Like, side hustles and ventures. And that's where me pursuing all the projects on the side, whether it was our early film projects or it was all the failed and then the successful tech startups, it was as a result of not being motivated at the day job and me looking at other way to keep my motivation because I'm just an ambitious person, just generally.
So I think you dropped a lot there, and I want to back a little bit of it.
I know it kind of went a couple of tangents, but I brought it back.
Right. No, exactly. And you've also started jumping in a bit into how, some specific things that you did to address it. But some of what I want to bring up here is you mentioned something, and it reminds me of a book by Daniel Pink that's called Drive. And basically what he talks about in there, I think the book title is, I think it's around how to find your drive and motivation. Again, I forget the exact name right now, but basically, it's the drive, the surprising truth about what motivates us. And he highlights three key things, and you touched on all of those in what you were saying: autonomy, mastery, and purpose being three key drivers that if people have those, they're going to ultimately have motivation that's then going to help, again, drive them forward. Ultimately is highly summarized premise of that. So I think that is important. And as you mentioned it, I think that autonomy side of it is really critical and something that a lot of individuals miss out on sometimes because poor leaders who aren't, arming them with that, or because leaders, oftentimes a lot of leaders, and this is a little bit of what I was alluding to before too, is if a leader can't be really clear on some of their own, their own vision and direction, what it is, it can make it difficult for individuals to start thinking about how they actually need to achieve X things to get there. And when that happens, I think a company really misses out because then you find that individuals start looking elsewhere for that. Now, that's not always a bad thing. Obviously, it is at least a way. Like, I think if it wasn't for us looking at some of our, side hustles a few at times, we may have left the company long before, but that helped pacify us during those downtimes. And you had said another thing too that I think is good, even though at the same time we could look back and be like, hey, they were using that to their benefit. Like when we were involved in some of these conversations that were more high level and invited into these senior staff meetings, being the youngest individuals in the room. But with that, it was ironically also in some ways a way to be like, but we may not get you that promotion right away or that extra pay right away. But it's literally using the things that might motivate us against us, because when you look at those three things, autonomy, mastery, purpose, they don't say paycheck in there, because sometimes we think we're motivated by a paycheck because it is nice to have more money and the things that come with it. But ultimately, that's actually not what motivates us. But what we don't want to have happen is people not to acknowledge those contributions, because that could then start creating this other sort of sense of, I don't want to say why bother, but it people can start carrying, losing trust and loyalty in employers when that type of thing happens.
Yeah. I mean, paycheck is just a form of reward. It's
Right.
the primary type of reward that employers pay employees. And when you're not rewarded for the contributions you're making, yeah, your motivation definitely goes down. There's other things I remember hearing, like you have to pay your dues or you have to wait your turn. And then when I would rebuttal and come up with some kind of comparison that says, okay, well, this person did this person did this, why am I being held back? Then I would get a response like, well, you shouldn't compare yourself to others. I'm like, are you kidding me? Well, I don't understand that logic. We're in this, competitive place where everybody is jockeying for kind of position. You have to compare yourself to others in the same way that if you were a startup founder, you're going to do a competitive analysis of your other competitors. So if peers around you are your competitors, why would you not do a competitive analysis? That logic never made sense to me.
And just to build on that, it's like, all right, a lot of companies, they seem to somehow be satisfied with just keeping people right at the spot, call it the worker bee mentality, even though there's studies out there. I think it's at 400% greater results from top performers. But if you take what you just said and consider that when it comes to athletes and in that scenario, can you imagine telling athletes are literally competing to be the best that they can be. Now, some people might say, oh yeah, but you don't want to create a competitive environment. No, you and I could have had competition against, ourselves, but we're still friends and we still ultimately are cheering on and supporting. It can be this fun competition just like you can have against yourself. And I do think that that's harm that companies do that they may not realize that actually drops motivation down is when they are trying to hold people up to these really weird, standards that are often only in existence because, for example, not to take it all into what do you call it, generations, but I'll go there. If a baby boomer had to wait 17 years to get to their position, then they're saying the same thing to, that millennial or, Z or whatever the generation might be, even though the millennial and Z might actually be like, I hear you and I see what you did. But ultimately, if it's about the value I'm bringing and I'm able to bring that value sooner, would you like that? Or would you like me to take that over to another company? And I think that's how people start feeling inside. And we broke through that a lot because we were able to achieve things that others around us struggled a bit more with, I think, because of what you said, of how you position some of those things. But there's always that rebuttal, almost like they're specially trained to stop you from it. But they're killing the motivation then. And I think that's why you have things out there. And people talk about quiet quitting, which I know we've wanted to do a whole conversation about. But quiet quitting in its own right is almost like an individual's like, they already checked out because they weren't motivated. And now they're either doing what they need to get by, or this is where they then go with the side hustle. And again, side hustles, I think, are ultimately a good thing. But I think companies can look at some of the things negative if you're not 100% in the business. So on that topic, quiet quitting, I'm curious to your thoughts when you hear that.
Yeah, I don't look at it like negatively. I think quiet quitting is just somebody putting in average expectant performance because they're being treated average. So they're mentally saying, well, if I'm going to just be treated average, then I'm going to give you average. And
Yeah.
I would say that the responsibility goes to the company, not the individual. So if companies want to stop quiet quitting, companies need to take ownership of understanding how to motivate the workforce, not say, okay, you're out, buddy, because you're not performing well. That
Yeah.
you're just going to replace one quiet quitter with another one. You're not going to solve the root cause.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, generationally, um, it's just evolved where because of the internet, because of technology, and everything else that people could do on their own, Well, the younger generation is looking and saying, why would I wait 15, 20 years to do XYZ at a company where I could just go become, a one-man company and earn the same amount of money in like 3 years?
Or make a leap to another company where they're willing to pay it now because they need somebody in that role, and they'll then look past that arbitrary thing. Kind of like
Yeah.
degrees get me there too, because they're like, you need a bachelor's. And I remember we face this at times, and then it's like, well, why do you need a bachelor's? And the answer is often like, well, because that's just the requirement. And it's like, but why?
Yeah. I don't look at the new generation, whether it was millennials and anybody after, as lazy. I do think that there is that stigma about this newer generation that they're lazy. I just think they have options and they know how to leverage technology to pursue those options. Some become very successful at it, some don't. But I personally don't think they're lazy, any less lazy than any previous generation. And what it bothers me that our generation, some our generations, which we're kind of in that Gen X area, and then before us, what was before us? It's boomers, and then what was it after boomers?
Was it boomers and then Gen X? I can't remember. And
No,
then
there's something there.
I don't know. Now
Look
I'm
it
like,
up.
I got to figure it out. Yeah, I thought there was that. But seven living generations. You have the great generation, the silent, then the boomers. No, then it's Gen X, millennials, and
Okay.
Gen Z. But I'm on the cusp, so I consider myself more of that millennial. I'm just right.
I do too. I would say my thought process aligns a lot more with millennials thinking.
Yeah, which I think, and maybe others would disagree on this, but for me, I feel like that's allowed this really interesting thing as we've managed teams to be able to speak this one generation and then another generation because of how we've approached things. But I do think that a style alone of a leader in its own right can be a big thing that again leads to somebody being less motivated. I remember a conversation I was having at some point with a coworker. We were actually at some sort of a leadership thing, and the question came up. It's going to sound strange, but it's relevant. He came up and he said, "The whoever was hosting this conversation is like, well, you want to support aspirations of team members." And this coworker said, "Well, wait, what if I have a team member who's like wants to be a clown? Am I supposed to help support that?" And my answer back to it is, I said, "I think so, and I
Yeah,
believe it's like this." Yeah,
100%.
I'm like, here's how that might look. It doesn't mean that you have to be like, it's okay to wear your red nose into work. Although if somebody did that, I'd actually probably be like, sweet, do it. But what it would mean is if that person had to be off Friday nights a few hours early because they had to get to a birthday party, then sweet, I want to, do it. I mean, as silly as it sounds, there are ways that you could support these things. And just by doing that, you're now creating both a loyalty and a respect for them that I also think is a core piece of it. But you're also allowing them to have a sense of mastery, even if it's in their, whatever their aspirations and where they want to move, which I also think is important.
Yeah. I also, when we talk about motivation, there's obviously personal for you, like how do you stay motivated? But then in a leadership role, I definitely took on the responsibility of making sure that I motivated people on a regular basis. And it's definitely trial and error. I had a room where I put a bunch of quotes all over the wall, and we call it the wall of quotes. Because to me, people walking in and reading one of their favorite quotes was like a little burst of motivation for that morning. But the tricky part about motivation is that it's like a balloon. It inflates and then deflates very quickly. So it's this constant thing of how do you keep motivated and how do you keep motivating. And I'll never forget, like, I think probably was in that early at Disney when we were both there. So some of those early wins we had both at Disney and then some of the things we're working on externally, it just felt like good progress. And I guess you would call my hope was still at that, a 25, 23, 24-year-old hope, which is very different than mid 40s hope, because in 2 decades you get tainted a little bit and family gets involved. But my 23, 24-year-old self, that hope that I had, I'll never forget driving, and I would like listen to a piece of music that would like push my motivation up. I would just scream out of the top of my lung in the car all by myself because I was so jacked up and motivated. I've been trying to recreate those moments ever since. And, you know, both of us did this where we went to Tony Robbins seminars, and that was amazing for those 2, 3 days. Oh, yeah, I was so motivated. But then, you know, 2 weeks goes by from those seminars and it goes down. So it's very tricky to keep that motivation up. But I think it just takes deliberate action and planning to keep that motivation up and going. And for sure, not to tie up your motivation to somebody else's action. You have to take ownership of that as well. Like, don't always rely on a leader to motivate you because, you know, unfortunately, most leaders are really bad at motivating because that's a different type of leadership skill that at least I haven't seen most leaders have.
Yeah, I think with what you're mentioning about, you know, motivation coming and going, motivation is in essence, you know, it's when it comes out of you from on more of an emotional like standpoint, and it's like, yeah, that is fleeting. You can invite it. You know, if I sit down to do work, it's like I have the things that I create with my environment and the music and other things I might put on. But really what it comes down to is discipline, which is what a lot of people struggle with. And I think that's why when a lot of people are looking for it and saying, I just need to get motivated. Well, the best way to get motivated is to create momentum. The best way to create, because then by nature, you're starting to feel good about the progress and the things you're seeing. But a lot of people don't start. It's sort of like, I don't know, maybe this is a horrible example, but it's like with the gym. It's like, well, people have those moments of motivation for the gym, but because they don't see the result right away, they sometimes don't stay consistent with it. And, you know, you do have the people who stick with it for a while. And now you start seeing these folks at times are runners and they just love it and they get so much out of it because they've created this routine and discipline out of it. That's now almost a natural thing that they're able to bring into their world. And I think that's one of the keys is to be able to make sure, like back to what you said with progress and happiness. And I think it's something Tony Robbins also references is like the key to happiness. And I think that when we're happier, we feel more motivated. So I think that's one of the most important things that any of the listeners here can do is make sure that you actually start looking at a disciplined approach, a regular approach, schedule the thing, make sure you're chipping at whatever it is daily and moving towards it. And through that, I think that's how you can create at least a level of that. I want to ask you a question though, too, because, you know, throughout my life, one of the things that, you know, I've sometimes come back to you and said, oh man, this is like, can be such a struggle around like what Simon Sinek talks about is finding your why, which we could go back to your purpose, like in what drives you. Well, I've sometimes struggled with that because I feel like I could flip and flop. And sometimes I'm like, wait, is this my purpose or is this a purpose I think society wants me to have? And I do think it can be powerful when people can unlock it. But I'm curious, you know, like, how do you approach that? Or what do you think about as far as whether it's your own why or how powerful you think that is and how necessary when it comes to motivation?
Few things. One, I think going back to the momentum piece that you mentioned, you have to like the process of whatever you're doing. There's something that you have to enjoy the process because when you don't like the process, nothing's going to motivate you. You're just going to be a miserable person all day. So enjoying the process, and that's, you have to figure out, what do you enjoy during the process? Do you like the people you interact with? And that's what keeps it enjoyable. Do you like the end goal of whatever you're doing? That's, you know, something that you like and you enjoy, that will help you get momentum. And that momentum, you know, will lead to bursts of motivation here and there. But like you said, motivation is an emotion, and it's going to come and go. just like any other emotion. To answer your question around why and purpose, it's I think both of us and a lot of people sometimes struggle with this and beat themselves because you think that your why needs to be like this, let's save world hunger type of why. But in reality, it doesn't have to be. I had an epiphany a while back where I was kind of looking at, it was one of those times where you look at, well, why do I even exist? What am I doing here? And I started thinking about some of the billionaires of the world and looking at Bill Gates or name your billionaire, whether you like them or not. They get into philanthropy because they realize that, well, their why is actually now using their money for the greater good. And they find some purpose around that. My guess is that when Bill Gates started Microsoft, his purpose was probably nothing to do with the philanthropy work that he's doing now. So then I thought about it. Well, most people are not billionaires. Most people are not millionaires. So how can somebody find that why and purpose in life when they don't have the financial means? And that's when it hit me that universe, nature, God, whatever you believe in, I think has set up human society in a way that you could feel your purpose no matter what your experience and financial capabilities are. And not everybody does this because this is a choice as well. But those who become parents, there's this instant why and purpose that is born after 9 months. And to me, when I became a dad, that's when kind of I started to realize my immediate why is my well-being of my kids and making sure that I get them to a place where they are a better person and a more successful than I am. That kind of became my purpose and why, my immediate why. Then beyond that, I realized, okay, hopefully I am at a financial place where I can pursue secondary purposes and whys outside of family. And what I've always kind of had this desire for is to help other young Armenians, whether the diaspora in the U.S. or Armenians in Armenia. That kind of became my kind of reason why I want to do some of these things, because I want to hopefully be in a place where I could financially be able to pursue that purpose and why. Outside of that, what I thought early on in my 20s and 30s around purpose and big this and big that, that's kind of phased away from me. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I stopped thinking about some of those really big, audacious goals. But at the end of the day, I think something that you and I talked about before a lot, I've always had the mindset of I hopefully don't want to die a social security number, that I want to be remembered for something. And that kind of drives me too. And that kind of motivates me here and there. I can't say that motivates me on a daily basis, because that's one of those audacious things that it's hard to quantify and touch. It's not tangible. But that kind of, when I get to this place of like lack of motivation and I forget about why I'm here, thinking about those three things kind of grounds me again. I'm like, okay, let's do this. I got something to make happen today. And it's baby steps. Every day you just got to like the process and make progress one step at a time. And then when you look back 5-10 years from now, you're like, holy crap, that's a lot of progress. But to think about the end goal, and it just becomes really difficult because it's so big.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And I think, with that too, it does become a little bit about, I don't want to say loving the journey, or at least enjoying that. But, it's interesting, as you mentioned, it's a change in motivation. And I think that's another thing that is why some people may also hit this point where they feel less motivated and they're struggling with whether or not that's okay. because it may just be that their priorities have changed, but they haven't sort of trued up who they were expecting or wanting to be versus who they're now actually aiming for. And because sometimes there can be that, in between. I remember you used to talk about wanting to make your, dent in the world, which is related to not being just also a number, depending on how you look at your social security number. Which, by the way, on that, when you said that in the workplace, that was also my thing. Is I don't want to think about my life as being somebody who is just a personnel number in a company. It always rubs me wrong.
Yeah, and I think for both of us, that ambitious mindset made it difficult for certain people to deal with us.
Oh yeah,
they just didn't know how to deal with people that were so ambitious and constantly were pushing forward, and we became an issue instead of somebody that can help them.
Right. No, totally it. But we were the issue in some ways also because in some cases companies also acknowledged, or the companies we were at, that they didn't want to lose, us, because obviously we were still contributing a lot. But it started becoming this question because now your peers who may not be, playing it the same way, it all of a sudden starts to bring this sort of question of fairness and balance, which is something that also was a motivator for us to figure out our next paths in lives as well. And ultimately, and that's where I guess I'd say when it comes to motivation and possible career change, for us, we ultimately ended up proceeding down the career change path, partially because we weren't getting our own, what's the way to put it? We weren't hitting those growth, sort of things. At least for me, the mastery piece of it, I kind of felt like, all right, it's like hit this ceiling, and then had ample autonomy. But in that scenario, it almost became like, okay, great. But then that purpose side of it became that big question mark. And I think a lot of people feel that when they've been in a role for a while and get stuck. So I'm curious, what are your recommendations if somebody is losing or has lost motivation in their role? What would you recommend to them?
If somebody's lost motivation in their role, my immediate reaction would be, well, let's talk about it, and let's drill into the why first. But if I can't do that, if it's just a general advice, I would say start talking to peers and start talking about what is it that you want to do. And then make it vocal. Don't assume that people know. Go to people above you and leadership, and let them know how you feel, and tell them what you're interested in, and hope and position yourself to be moved into a role that will motivate you and you like the process. And if that doesn't work, you have two things. You can keep staying patient and unmotivated and just collect the paycheck, or make a move to a role that actually makes you motivated, either within the same company or outside of the company. But I wouldn't say you can't get stagnant, because that really takes its toll on you when you're not. Just the fact of taking action to solve the lack of motivation feels like progress. Like just doing something about it feels like, okay, there's something here. Not doing anything about it is the worst thing you could do, because you could just go into a rabbit hole, and that's where mental health and depression will kick in.
It goes back to, again, it's progress.
It's all progress.
Yeah. So there's three things that in the guide that I wrote, and in ultimately three categories I tried to attempt to answer a similar question around, which was that you can either, you either ditch the job if you've hit this point where it's true. Like sometimes people can't get it of their own way, meaning like the job might not even be the issue at that point. That person not being able to see past it. It's like being in a unhealthy relationship, but not, struggling to get out of it. And that's why sometimes when people are actually laid off, or whatever it is, they may go on to do even better things, but they got so caught and they got in that rut that they couldn't get themselves out of it. So to me, ditching might be something you have to do there. The second one, which I think you also touched on here, is around improving. Like, how can you actually improve the role, the way you're working in it? This is where you look at ways that you automate and things like that, which ironically, going back to what you were saying before too, around the people putting people in a category and saying they're lazy. It's hilarious. One person who's lazy, to another is the same person who, because they were lazy, decided to automate something because they didn't want to have to do it. But doesn't that actually make them, a innovative or process driven or what have you? But so there's ditch, improve, and the last one is fuse. And this can work with a side hustle, or it can work with just whatever it is that you're looking at long term for yourself. You fuse what you are actually looking to grow more mastery around, or what fits your future, and you find a way to make that job help you acquire those skills and the things that you need. Because now you can unlock more meaning out of the job and be able to move it forward. So those are the thing, again, ditch, fuse, and improve, that I think are great ways for
those
people.
are great. Yeah. Talking about layoffs or anything like negative event like that.
Yeah.
Those are the best motivators in life. If you actually use that as a chip on your shoulder and you want to prove people wrong. So don't shy away from those type of life moments. Just grab the horn by the bull and grab the bull by the horn and go for it. Because you're going to be that type of pain. That's the type of motivation that doesn't go away quickly. It's you could constantly, bring that feeling back. And I've seen so many people go through that process where they got laid off, they got divorced, some negative life event happened, and they used it as fuel. And oh my God, some of them are so super successful right now that I'm jealous.
You see it with some people in sports too, of how they're like, oh, okay, watch how I come back with this. But I think even relationships, there's the ones where people get a relationship, they'll be like, I'll show her or I'll show him or whatever it is, because now it's like, you'll see what you're missing, whatever. Yeah. And that could actually, that's okay as a purpose or a why as a driver. Eventually you'll probably transition out of that. Who knows? Maybe you'll stick to it for the rest of your life. But no, I think it's a great point. I want to highlight one other thing too, is that, two things actually, I guess. With that, again, sometimes people are so stuck in their own way that they can't see that the better thing for them is getting out of their current, I'm trying to say mentality. So I'll take it back to quiet quitting, because I do agree that often
it's a comfort zone. I think sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone.
Exactly.
And the comfort zone becomes your crutch. And you can't really get out of it.
I agree. And I think with quiet quitters, I actually think that for a moment, individuals that fall into that category might, which again, it's got a label now. So, we'll call it that, even though it's happened forever. So people act like it's new. It's hilarious, and put it on a generation or something. But ultimately, I think that person who's in that situation, this quiet quitter, is actually the one who probably loses the most, unless they are working on some amazing side hustle or somehow getting like really like significant meaning or extra value out of their life. Because a lot of people will take that extra time and then they just reinvest it into things like Netflix or social media or things that aren't going to actually help them later in life. And I think that's a huge problem. Sometimes people who lack motivation also happen to say they lack time. And it's not a lack of time normally. It's a lack of actually making
prioritization. It's a lack of
exactly, and then the discipline around what they want to achieve.
To kind of wrap this up, we're kind of in this weird year of 2023, which it got kicked off towards the end of 2022, where the economy is in this weird place and companies are doing mass layoffs. Well, anybody that's getting laid off, I'm sorry for you. I think the future is bright. So use that as your motivation. But the people that are left behind, they're now left with picking up the pieces of the work that everybody else was doing. What's your advice on how does the person that didn't get laid off stay motivated in that same atmosphere that's now being created because of the layoffs and the tense atmosphere and the anxiety that has been there for months leading up to each company laying off mass number of people?
So I think that the way I've approached it in the past, because you and I have been through, I don't know, 7, 8 layoffs. In fact, here today, you hear about Disney. What is it? They've got, is it 7,000 or is it higher that
Yeah,
they're expecting
something
to
like
get
that.
laid off?
Yeah.
And look, that's just the way of, and I'd say the way of Disney, but it's the way of corporate jobs in general, because this is how ultimately they continue to. It's the cycle. It's like expand. Oh, we expanded too much. Pull it back in. Expand too much. And it's also a way of saying here are people. Sometimes here are some people who weren't the best fit, or they just weren't the right fit for that with the leader and them. Because sometimes it's not even about that individual. But I think, to me, I always try to look at it regardless. Is I want to give my best. I want to be a top performer, and that's what I strive for. And I'm constantly looking for ways that I could, deliver value to that company, to the boss, or whoever it might be. So for me, the motivation comes from trying to find these ways. And I think you and I, and part of our, more rapid career progression, and a lot of people that we were surrounded by, is because we ultimately kept looking for better ways to do things, because that was like our creative outlet almost. We came a background that was going to go down the pathway more filmmaking that. And we just found ways to be able to do that. And I think between the value side of it and then fostering the relationship side of it, I think those actually position people so that when they do come out of this, I don't know. I guess I don't think about this as I just survived this one, or this was this one. I always look at it as, okay, great. Let me play for the future and continue to always play for the future. It might be a little harder for a minute because you have some extra work you're going to have to figure out, but then you've got tools like AI out there. Look, if somebody's looking at some of the AI tools now and they can actually help lead those in an organization, that's going to help them. So I think they just need to find the thing that is going to get them excited to plow forward, because a lot of opportunities came out. You and I got promoted during recessionary periods, and we were able to climb out above that. So I think it's just, I'll tie it to a key thing that's probably really important for people to look at here. And that's to a lot of people, when we pass in the hallway, someone's like, yeah, man, oh, these, I'm trying to think about it. Like there was almost this Eeyore mentality that people would have of where like, oh man, it's just, hard here and there's this and that. Whereas you and I would have a mentality instead where we're like, okay, how do we, take these lemons and turn it into lemonade? And how can we make this best? And that's why then, while some people were then playing it safe and comfortable during that period of time, we were making our moves. And then when we were climbing back out, we were rewarded for those moves. So I think people just got to keep moving forward. Use this as the extra push to say, I'm going to be the best I possibly can be, because guess what? Even if your work isn't going to show you the benefits to that ASAP, that's going to benefit you when you decide to either jump to another job, or when there is available position, or if you decide you want to leverage it in your side hustle. So keep plowing forward is, all I can think of day by day.
Yeah, no, I agree. And to kind of add to that and then end this episode, I think it's the mindset of glass half full or glass half empty. And
Totally.
I always approached it as, when situations like this happen, the Great Recession, we both were promoted those periods, and several others before and after that. I always looked at it as an opportunity. I never looked at it as, oh my God, I'm going to now get more work. Oh my God, this is going to suck. No, I was like, oh, okay, there's somebody in the leadership role was just let go. A new leader now has to somehow absorb all that work. Opportunity. And that's kind of was my mindset. So my advice to everybody in that position of not being laid off, but now feeling like they're left with, cleaning up the pieces and having more work, is look at it as an opportunity where you can insert yourself and cross your, imaginary line of responsibility, whatever that box is that you're in. Go cross that box and reach out and see where you can help and add value where you normally wouldn't have been able to. And then just keep pushing forward. The other thing that always kept me motivated was ideas. For some reason, when I was in a position that I was able to come up with ideas, present them, and then the ideas that actually got approval to help execute on that really motivated me.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of because I think that was triggering the entrepreneurship side of my brain, which is that's what entrepreneurship is idea and executing and building something, and that's kind of motivates me a lot. And right now, these periods are ripe for that. There are just so many ideas you can come up with, given AI and anything else, plus the holes that are left within the company. So just keep pushing forward and think half glass full, not empty.
I agree. I want to add one more thing to that too, because I think it's a really important point is that oftentimes, if people try to present stuff during, call it good times at a company, sometimes those ideas actually are heard less because people are comfortable. They're not as motivated to do them. But when people have to look for ways that they got to save millions or they have to do it better, now all of a sudden those ideas that they would have just before been like, yeah, sure, maybe, they're now ripe to harvest. And when you start doing that, all of a sudden you're finding that you're the hero because you've helped to turn something around or to increase the value. Those ideas might have existed before. It's just the ears and eyes were closed off to it because people were just, I don't know, protecting their kingdoms or just not wanting to see them because it felt small, when in fact now it's actually going to make the difference that people need to be able to move.
My God, we can go days talking about examples of this exactly situation of somebody not listening to our ideas because the money was flowing in, but as soon as the waterfall was slightly shallow, all of a sudden, where are your ideas at? And then boom, we were ready because we had a pocket.
That's exactly it. And that's why I think, even when you initially asked that question, it's like, gosh, I actually didn't connect the pain as much to those sides. I actually connected probably more like, not joy, but in essence, I connected more opportunity to that. And also something you and I did really well that I think is also important with this is that because we were often thinking that way in general and tried to look at how we could add value and foster some of those relationships and, some other things. And we motivated our teams during these recessions. Our teams were not really impacted very much. Like I honestly, very few,
little,
if ever.
Very little. Yeah.
And it's because we were these areas of value, innovation, process improvement. And that's what we fostered. And I think that's something else for leaders that are out there who are facing some of this is the more you can do that, and you got to get good about articulating and showing what that value is. Well, then opportunities like this, what happens if people actually come to you and say, can you please fix this and take this too? We're in a pickle. And again, that then leads to opportunities for you and your team, which again, as a leader, that's what you want to see and you want to position them for that. So you position them to hopefully less likely to be impacted. I know it's never a guarantee, but we did really good considering the stats in the company. And you want to then, help them, grow in those roles. And I think that's an important factor that maybe we talk about in the future about how leaders can best motivate their teams, because that's the other side of this one.
Yeah, that's a good one. And I mean, tying it back to motivation, just that mindset of thinking opportunity will keep your motivation going.
100%. And let me sneak in one more thing here. I know we keep saying that, but this is a topic you mentioned this to you a little bit beforehand as well, but sometimes with the purpose side of it, people are looking for something that, has to be, big, whether it be family, which by the way, then some people who are like, but my family is, but it's not like, that maybe for family, like for me, it becomes a bit more of, well, I want to make sure I blaze a path for my kids so that they know that there's other options outside of just the corporate side, hence me not pursuing the corporate side now. And I want to teach them those skills and do that with them. But there's these two stories that stick with me where it was a doorman and I think it was somebody who is in basically a janitorial related job. And these individuals, I think in the whatever 50, 60 years they were at this company, it might've been longer actually, they did not miss a day of work. And now I know today we're like, whoa, COVID, you better stay away if there's something like that. But I can't say what their health was, but they didn't miss a day, not because they couldn't, but because they loved their job so much, because they were able to attach this level of, again, call it autonomy, mastery, and purpose with that job. And some people might be thinking, but how do you do that as a janitorial or as a doorman? And like the way the doorman had expressed it is he looked at his job as putting a smile on each person's face that came in and out of that door. And that in its own right can give you this ability of purpose and tie back to this impact that, it may not be giving away riches as what you said some of the, the Bill Gates and others would do, but it's giving back the same thing people get on the other side of the riches, which is
it is. It's all about
yeah,
giving back. And
exactly.
you find ways to do that. And it doesn't have to be, require billions of dollars. It could be small
Yep.
as a smile. Yeah, no,
Yep. And
totally.
I think when we could start comparing ourselves though to others and then that could become detrimental in our ability to even feel motivated, because it's easy when you're comparing yourselves everywhere else to go to that opposite,
Yeah,
pathway. But
yeah.
I won't talk anymore. I know we got to shut this one
No,
down.
this was good. This was good. So thank you for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, up or down, wherever platform you're listening to, and
Share it with friends.
share with friends for sure. Share with friends, and then come back next week for the next episode. Thank you. Bye.
This is the way.
This is the way.